The night was cold, and the highway stretched endlessly under a pale moon. A black SUV raced down the deserted road, its headlights cutting sharp beams into the mist. Inside sat a man with a hardened face, his eyes void of emotion. He gripped the wheel tightly as if the world owed him nothing. Beside him, curled in fear, was a pit bull with a scar running down his side, trembling in silence. Suddenly, the man cursed, "You're nothing but trouble," and with a swift motion he flung the door open. The dog, confused and terrified, was shoved out onto the rough asphalt. A cry of pain echoed as the pit bull tumbled, scraping his body against the unforgiving ground. Cars behind honked angrily, swerving to avoid him, their horns screaming into the night. The SUV sped away without a glance, its taillights fading like a cruel memory. The pit bull struggled to rise, his body trembling, his breath shallow. He limped to the edge of the road, his eyes wide with fear, as the cold wind bit into his wounds. The night grew heavier, and for the first time he realized he was utterly alone. The pit bull staggered to his feet, the asphalt tearing into his paws. Every muscle ached, yet he forced himself forward, driven by the instinct to survive. Passing cars illuminated his broken body, shadows stretching long behind him. The cold night air stung his wounds, carrying the faint smell of oil and burnt rubber. His scar glistened under the moonlight, a cruel reminder of pain that would never fade. His breaths came out ragged, each one sharp, desperate. He looked around, eyes darting toward strangers and speeding cars, silently pleading for help, but no one stopped. The roar of engines drowned his cries, the world rushing by without mercy. For the pit bull, every second felt endless, every step a battle against collapsing. He limped toward the edge of the road, seeking shelter in darkness, but only emptiness waited. He was invisible to those who passed, nothing more than a shadow fading into the night. The pit bull paused, collapsing onto the gravel. His body trembled violently, and a low whimper escaped his throat. His eyes darted toward the distant glow of the city, as though salvation might lie there. He remembered voices once filled with laughter, a family he had trusted, and the warmth of gentle hands. Now, only silence filled the night. His heart pounded painfully, his breathing shallow, yet within his gaze flickered something more than despair. A trace of loyalty, an ember refusing to die, glowed faintly in his broken stare. Pain coursed through him, but his spirit whispered to keep going. Though abandoned, he had not given up, even as the night tried to swallow him whole. The black SUV sped away, its red taillights glowing like eyes of a predator in the fog. The man inside did not glance back, his jaw set, his expression devoid of humanity. He muttered coldly, "Not my problem anymore," gripping the wheel tighter as if absolving himself of guilt. Behind him, the highway swallowed the sound of the pit bull's cries, muffled under the roar of passing vehicles. The cruelty was deliberate, as though erasing a burden was easier than facing loyalty. The night bore witness, but offered no justice, only silence stretching endlessly across the road. The pit bull reached an abandoned lot, collapsing against rusted fences covered in weeds. The cold ground pressed against his wounds, and he whimpered softly, curling into himself. His body shook, but his eyes searched the darkness, desperate for comfort that never came. The world felt endless, yet in that moment he still breathed, still fought. A lonely howl escaped his throat, echoing against broken concrete walls, fading into silence. It was not a call for rescue, but a cry of grief, a release of pain. The pit bull lay there trembling, his heart aching with betrayal, yet the faint ember of hope glimmered within, waiting for something, someone, to notice. The pit bull lay in the shadows, his breathing shallow, eyes filled with memories of a time when life felt safe. He once belonged to a family who laughed in warm rooms and played in bright gardens. He remembered a young boy calling, "Max, come here," as small hands wrapped around his neck in trust. Back then, loyalty was rewarded with love, and his heart overflowed with joy. Now that world was gone, leaving only scars and emptiness. His body trembled, but his soul clung to fragments of hope, refusing to surrender to despair. Though cast aside, his eyes told a story of devotion unbroken by cruelty. He searched the night sky as though love might descend again. The pitbull's heart whispered silently, "I am still here, still loyal, still waiting." The bull limped forward, his gaze fixed on passing cars, desperate for kindness. Headlights flared, briefly illuminating his scarred body, before fading back into darkness. His ears perked at every sound of laughter from within, his tail twitching slightly with instinctive hope. A mother looked away as her child pointed, her hand pulling him closer to safety. The dog's eyes pleaded silently, "See me, don't let me disappear." But the world kept rushing past, indifferent to his suffering. His chest rose and fell in sharp, shallow breaths, and still he waited, believing someone would stop. He carried an unshaken faith, even as rejection pressed harder against his fragile heart. A child in the back seat of a passing car pressed his face against the glass, eyes wide at the sight of the lonely dog. "Look, Mom, a dog," he said, voice filled with innocent wonder. The mother's expression turned uneasy, her eyes avoiding the animal as she whispered, "Don't look, sweetheart." The pitbull's gaze locked with the child's, a fleeting moment of connection that pierced the silence. His ears lifted slightly, his chest tightening with a forgotten feeling. Then the car was gone, leaving him in the cold again. Yet for that moment he had felt seen, as if a spark of humanity had touched his soul. He lowered his head slowly, carrying the weight of abandonment, but refusing to let that fragile spark die. The pit bull curled tightly against a cold alley wall, pressing his body to the ground for warmth. The sharp scent of garbage filled the air, and his paws trembled with exhaustion. His stomach growled, the ache of hunger gnawing at his insides, but he closed his eyes, retreating into fragile dreams of better days. He saw the child's hand resting on his head, the echo of laughter carried by the wind. In the distance, city lights flickered, indifferent to his suffering. He exhaled a low whine, a sound swallowed by the night. Though despair crept closer, he did not surrender. His heart clung stubbornly to the hope that somewhere, someone still cared. A figure stepped from the shadows of the alley, their breath visible in the cold air. A woman with tired eyes and worn clothes stood watching quietly. She was in her mid-30s, carrying a small bag of supplies, her face lined by both fatigue and compassion. She paused, her heart breaking at the sight of the pit bull. The dog's eyes lifted, cautious but yearning, their gaze meeting hers. For a moment, the world was silent, a fragile thread of connection forming. She whispered gently, "It's okay, boy, I see you." Though the dog did not move, his trembling eased slightly, as if the words had reached his heart. It was the first time in days that he felt noticed, not as a burden, but as a life worth saving. Dawn bled gray over the city, as Max nosed through a toppled bin behind a diner. Grease and rain mixed into a bitter perfume that stung his throat. His stomach clawed at him, yet he moved with quiet care. A cook stepped out, scowling, and kicked the bin hard. The crash rang out like a warning bell in the alley. Max flinched but held his ground, eyes low, tail tucked. The man shouted, "Scram, mutt," and waved a broken lid like a shield. Max backed away, paws slipping on wet cardboard. Hunger dragged at him, but pride made him slow. He had learned to wait, to take only what others left. The city woke, and with it came the familiar chorus of rejection. Still, Max searched the trash for one mercy he could swallow. The cook retreated, and another figure stepped from a side door with a stick. His voice was flat as concrete when he said, "Move, or I'll make you." Max froze, measuring distance and intent. He lowered his head, ears folding like paper. The stick swished the air and cracked against a crate. Wood splinters jumped, and Max darted sideways. He did not bare his teeth, though fear burned bright. He had learned that silence was safer than noise. The man advanced, boots loud and sure on the wet ground. "Last warning," he growled, raising the stick again. Max slid between trash bags, breath fogging the air. Survival chose the path, and it pointed deeper into shadow. Max slipped into a narrow service corridor that smelled of bleach and rust. The city's noise softened to a dull, distant drum. He pressed his flank to the wall and counted breaths. Pain traveled his side like a slow, electric wire. A rolling gate hung crooked, leaving a mouth of darkness. He eased through and found a dead end scattered with pallets. Rain tapped the tin roof in anxious fingers. He lay down, then rose again, chasing a better angle for rest. Sleep hovered, then fled when a bottle clinked outside. He whispered to himself without words, a vow to endure. In the hush, fear and hunger braided into one tight rope. A new sound threaded the rain, small and breakable. It was a kitten's mew, thin as a crack in glass. Max lifted his head and tasted the air. The scent was young, cold, and hungry. From beneath a bent pallet, a tiny shape trembled. Its eyes were wide moons, reflecting every fear. Max did not move closer, not yet. He turned his body to shield the opening from wind. The kitten watched, ribs ticking like a weak clock. Easy, little one, his silence seemed to say. The storm rolled another breath across the roof. In that pause, two strays measured the distance between danger and trust. Footsteps returned, heavier and impatient. The stickman pushed the crooked gate and peered in. There you are, he said, breath sharp in the cold. Max stepped forward before the pallet, body forming a wall. The kitten flattened, a whisper vanishing into wood. The man raised the stick, annoyance curdling to threat. Max did not growl, but his stance drew a line. He had nothing to bargain except courage. The rain pulsed harder, drumming a countdown on metal. Back off, the man snapped, taking one bold step. Max held the ground and fixed his calm, steady stare. In that stillness, a promise formed and took root. The sound of boots and radios broke the standoff as two uniformed shelter workers stepped into the alley. One carried a slip lead, the other a heavy blanket. Their eyes softened at the sight of Max shielding the kitten. Easy, boy, the younger man said, his voice low and careful. Max bristled, his stance rigid, unsure if this was rescue or another cruelty. The older worker crouched, palm open, letting the scent of leather and soap drift forward. The kitten cried, drawing attention, and the blanket was lowered gently over it. Max's chest heaved, torn between fight and surrender. He glanced once at the child of fur behind him, then bowed his head. For the first time since the road, he allowed hands near without defiance. Inside the shelter, fluorescent lights buzzed as Max was guided into a kennel. He patted cautiously, each paw hesitant on the concrete floor. The kitten was carried in another worker's arms, its cries echoing down the sterile corridor. Max turned his head, ears pricked, following the sound. His body was tense, torn between fear and longing. A worker closed the gate with a soft clang, and he flinched. His scar itched under the harsh light, reminding him of betrayal. Yet when he lay down, eyes fixed on the kitten's cage across the aisle, something shifted. Though separated by bars, he watched, protective even in confinement. His loyalty anchored him in the unfamiliar place. As Max curled in the corner, memories surged unbidden. He saw a sunlit yard, the echo of a boy's voice calling, "Max, fetch." His paws pounded grass, his heart light with purpose. A uniformed man laughed, tossing again. The boy's father saluted another, both in crisp army fatigues. Max sat proud, a vest strapped across his chest. He had been more than a pet. He had been trusted, trained to guide, protect, and heal. The warmth of that life burned against the cold steel bars around him now. The memory blurred into the present, his scar aching with loss. The truth settled heavy. He was not just abandoned. He had been betrayed after service given in loyalty. The compassionate ally entered the shelter, her tired eyes softening as she scanned the kennels. Mid-30s, hair tied back, her worn coat brushed against her knees as she walked. She paused at Max's cage, kneeling to meet his gaze. "What happened to you, boy?" she whispered. Max lifted his head, nostrils flaring at her scent, a mix of soap, leather, and warmth. His tail gave a hesitant flick, as though testing the possibility of trust. The ally studied his scar, her brow furrowed with sorrow and recognition. She turned to a worker, asking, "Who trained him? He moves like he remembers commands." Hope threaded her voice, quiet but unshaken. Days passed with quiet exchanges. The ally returned each morning, crouching at Max's kennel, whispering words only he seemed to understand. She slid treats through the bars, not forcing touch, only offering patience. The kitten, now in a small carrier, purred when she stroked its head. Max watched, ears easing, as if the kindness poured into the kitten also healed him. When the ally finally opened the gate, Max did not retreat. He stepped forward slowly, nose brushing her hand. "Good boy," she murmured, tears brimming. For the first time since the highway, Max's body relaxed, and a fragile bridge of trust formed. The shelter doors swung open with a slam, and a familiar figure stepped in, Max's former owner. His cold eyes scanned the kennels, jaw clenched, voice sharp as steel. "That's my dog," he barked, pointing. Workers hesitated, shifting uneasily under his glare. Max's body stiffened, hackles rising, scar itching with memory. He pressed closer to the compassionate ally, heart pounding, ears flat. The man's boots thudded heavy, a storm of entitlement. The ally straightened, placing herself between Max and the threat. Her voice cut firm. "You forfeited that right the night you abandoned him." Silence weighed the air, the Pitbull trembling but refusing to cower. His eyes locked on the man who had left him broken, the past colliding with the present. The man's voice rose, sharp with rage. "That's my property." The ally held her ground, her eyes unwavering. "He's not property," she said, her words firm, her body braced. Max's tail tucked, yet his stance remained steady, shoulders squared. Workers exchanged uneasy glances, caught in the current of conflict. The man took a step forward, face twisted with contempt, spitting words of control. "Move aside." The ally's hand reached back, brushing Max's head, whispering softly, "You're safe now." Max's eyes widened, her voice a lifeline. The air tightened, charged with a tension that felt like lightning before the strike. The man lunged to grab Max's collar, but the dog surged forward, planting himself between the ally and danger. His chest expanded, eyes blazing, tail rigid. He did not bare his teeth in rage. Instead, his stance radiated defiance and protection. A low growl rumbled, steady and controlled, a line drawn in silence. The ally gasped, her heart racing, yet pride softened her fear. "He chooses," she said, her voice breaking with conviction. Max's scar gleamed under the fluorescent light, no longer a mark of shame but of survival. The man faltered, startled by the power in the Pitbull's gaze. For the first time, it was the dog who refused to yield. The man shouted, "He is mine!" but his words cracked against the silence. The ally raised her chin, tears burning her eyes. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking yet strong. "He belongs to no cruelty." Max lunged, not with teeth but with shield. His body blocked the man, paws sliding on the concrete, shoulders braced like armor. The workers rushed forward, pulling the man back, voices rising. The kitten mewed from its carrier, small sound slicing through the chaos. Max did not move, his eyes steady, holding the line until the threat was gone. He had chosen love, not fear, his loyalty anchored to the one who saw him. The struggle ended with the man dragged outside, his curses fading into the street. The shelter grew still, breathless after the storm. The ally knelt before Max, her hand trembling as it cupped his scarred face. "You saved me," she whispered, tears rolling freely. Max pressed his forehead into her palm, a silent vow exchanged. Kitten mewed softly, safe in its carrier, the sound like a fragile hymn. Workers stood frozen, their eyes wide with awe, as though witnessing redemption in motion. Max's tail flicked once, slow but certain, his gaze locked with hers. For the first time, his scar was not a burden but a crown. The shelter doors shut behind the abuser, his curses fading into distance. A police officer stepped forward, his calm voice confirming, "He won't bother you again." The ally exhaled, shoulders trembling, relief washing through her. Max stood tall beside her, chest rising steady, eyes no longer clouded with fear. His scar still burned, but now it carried the weight of triumph. Workers whispered quietly, shaken by what they had witnessed. The kitten curled in its carrier, purring softly, as though the storm had passed. The silence that followed was not empty. It was healing, fragile, but real. For Max, it was the first taste of justice, bittersweet and long overdue. Max was led into the shelter's medical wing, the scent of antiseptic sharp in the air. He patted cautiously, his paws clicking on the tile floor. A veterinarian knelt, offering a soft pat before beginning care. The ally stood nearby, eyes never leaving him. Scars were cleaned, wounds dressed with steady hands. Max flinched once, but his gaze returned to her, trusting the process. Kitten's tiny meows echoed from a corner, reminding him he was not alone. Every bandage wrapped was not just treatment but proof he was worth saving. His tail stirred faintly, slow but certain, the first flicker of healing from the inside out. That night, Max lay on a thick blanket in a quiet kennel, his body sore but his spirit steadier. The kitten curled against his side, tiny breaths warming the scar along his flank. The ally sat outside, cross-legged, reading paperwork under dim light, her presence a silent anchor. Max's ears twitched, his eyes following every shift of her hand, every turn of the page. For the first time, his body relaxed into rest, no longer jerking awake at every sound. The low hum of the shelter faded into background comfort. His breaths deepened, sensing with the kitten's soft purrs. Trust, fragile and new, settled into the night like a promise. Morning light streamed through high windows as the ally entered with a soft smile. She knelt, sliding open the kennel door slowly. "Good morning, Max," she whispered, voice warm with care. He rose carefully, ears flicking, tail wagging once, then again, stronger. The kitten stretched, mewing before clambering onto his paw. The ally stroked his head, her hand steady, tears threatening her eyes. "You're safe," she murmured, words carrying the weight of truth. Max pressed his forehead into her palm, eyes closing in surrender, not to fear but to trust. The scars remained, but love had begun to stitch what cruelty had torn apart. Later that day, Max followed the ally into a play yard, the grass damp with dew. He stepped cautiously at first, sniffing the air, his paws sinking into soft earth. The kitten tumbled after him, tiny and clumsy, yet fearless. The ally laughed gently, the sound carrying warmth. Max lifted his head toward the sky, the sun brushing over his scar, and breathed deeply. For the first time, freedom felt possible, not as a memory but as a future. His body bore the marks of betrayal, yet his heart pulsed with renewed hope. He had been broken, but he was not lost. The sun stretched long shadows across the open field, painting the grass with gold. Max bounded forward, his paws kicking up earth, the scar on his flank catching the light like a badge of honor. The kitten tumbled after him, clumsy but fearless, chasing his tail with playful determination. For a moment, the world was quiet. No cages, no chains, no echoes of cruelty, only the vast sky above and freedom beneath. The ally stood near the fence, her smile wide, her heart swelling at the sight. Max lifted his head to the breeze, his chest rising full, no longer weighed down by fear. The field became his kingdom, the horizon his promise. The owl's eyes brimmed with tears as she watched the two strays turned companions. She whispered to herself, "You're home now." Max slowed, circling back to her, tail wagging with a rhythm of gratitude. The kitten scrambled after him, its small paws carrying stubborn courage. Max nuzzled the owl's hand, pressing his head against her palm as if to etch her scent into memory. She knelt, wrapping both arms around his thick neck, the kitten climbing into her lap. The embrace was simple, yet unshakable, a moment of love strong enough to rewrite the story. For the first time, they all belonged. Max turned toward the horizon, his stance tall and proud. The sky blazed orange and purple, streaks of fire bleeding into clouds. The kitten curled at his paws, eyes wide with wonder, ears twitching at the evening wind. The ally stood beside them, her hand resting lightly on Max's shoulder, grounding them in silent unity. Together, they looked outward, toward a world no longer haunted by betrayal. For Max, this was no longer survival. It was living, breathing, belonging. The scars would remain, but they were no longer chains. They were proof of his fight, his loyalty, and his redemption. The ally whispered softly, "We made it." Max turned his head, eyes meeting hers, a silent bond stronger than words. The kitten purred, nestling closer against his paw, its tiny body trembling with contentment. In that fleeting moment, every cruelty, every cold night, every scar was rewritten into something greater. It was not just survival, it was victory. Love had not erased the pain, but it had transformed it into strength. The world grew quiet around them, the wind slowing, the light softening into twilight. Max closed his eyes briefly, as though sealing the moment into memory forever. The final scene unfolded in quiet triumph. Max and the ally walked side by side across the field, the kitten trotting just behind, their shadows long against the fading light. The sun slipped beneath the horizon, painting the sky with final strokes of fire and dusk. Max's stride was steady, no longer weighed down by chains of fear. The ally glanced at him, her smile small but radiant, knowing they had survived together. Max turned his head, meeting her gaze one last time, his scar gleaming faintly in the twilight. It was not the end of the story, it was the beginning of a new life, born from pain but carried by love.